Technology earns trust by easing pain, extending reach, and solving urgent problems that once felt fixed in place. However, that same trust becomes dangerous when convenience persuades a culture to stop asking what its tools quietly undo. New inventions rarely arrive as obvious threats because they usually appear first as relief, speed, precision, or access. What matters is the hidden trade, since every gain carries losses in memory, judgment, meaning, or social balance. A society becomes vulnerable when it treats tools as neutral servants instead of forms that shape thought and behaviour. That mistake lets technical habits move from helping with tasks to defining what truth, wisdom, and progress should mean. Once that shift begins, old institutions still look familiar, even while their purposes are being bent from within. The real danger is not one machine, but a whole atmosphere where questioning technology starts to feel irrational. In the next sections, you will see how tools became rulers, how information broke loose, and how resistance still matters. Technopoly by Neil Postman names that surrender and subscription to the channel for more careful readings of ideas that shape ordinary life. Older societies indeed built impressive devices, yet their tools were often embedded within a larger religious or customary order. People judged weapons, mills, clocks, and crafts by standards derived from honour, theology, and inherited social rules. A samurai sword was wrapped in bushido, and even the crossbow could be condemned as hateful to God. This older arrangement mattered because tools responded to culture rather than asserting authority over it. Even then, disruptions occurred, as the stirrup reshaped feudal power and the clock escaped monasteries for commerce. Matches also altered intimate customs, as privacy no longer depended on visiting a neighbouring hut for fire. These cases show that technology can always press against belief, even in a culture that appears stable and unified. But there is still a difference between occasional disruptions and a world where tools steadily seek to become everything. In a technocracy, symbolic life no longer confidently restrains technique, and traditions must fight simply to remain. The question is no longer whether a tool fits the culture, but whether the culture can survive its own momentum. Technocracy solidified when invention transformed from a means to evidence that progress itself demanded obedience. In the 19th century, industry fostered a faith in efficiency, expertise, measurement, standardization, and the notion that what works should prevail. Workers who destroyed machines were not foolish, but people defending customs, wages, and dignity against a hostile redesign. They lost, and their defeat mattered because resistance to mechanized logic now seemed inherently backward. Frederick Taylor advanced this shift by asserting that technique could replace unreliable human judgment in daily work. His system viewed ambiguity as waste, subjectivity as weakness, and measurement as the true path to decision. Once this mindset spread beyond factories, it entered schools, churches, homes, and public institutions with missionary zeal. People increasingly appeared not as citizens or children of God, but as markets, labour units, and measurable cases. This change prepared the ground for a culture that would seek legitimacy from method more than from meaning. Technopoly begins when efficiency ceases to be a useful tool and becomes a moral command. Information did not become overwhelming when computers arrived, but when printing first multiplied available facts beyond older habits of control. Schools, pagination, indexing, and curricula arose partly to sort that flood into sequence, priority, and usable forms. The deeper break came with the telegraph, which severed information from travel, locality, and immediate problem solving. News could now arrive from far away without addressing any pressing need in the life receiving it. The penny press quickly realised that speed and distance could sell relevance-free snippets as desirable commodities. Photography intensified the shift by making images feel like reality itself, even when language supplied no serious context. As these forces joined, information stopped serving judgment and increasingly demanded attention for its own sake. A society shaped by that habit becomes easy to distract, because abundance feels like knowledge, even when coherence vanishes. Once context collapses, public life fills with data, trends, and novelty that do not help people decide wisely. The improbable world begins when information is prized for volume and access more than meaning or use. A culture can endure heavy information only if strong institutions help decide what deserves trust, attention, and action. When those defences weaken, people turn to experts, machines, forms, and scores for a replacement sense of order. That is why a device promising truth by measuring stress in a telephone voice could sound plausible. If green lights declare honesty, difficult moral judgment looks old-fashioned beside a neat and visible technical verdict. Tests, polls, and taxonomies then gain prestige because they convert cloudy human realities into something that appears manageable. Yet this control is often administrative rather than truthful, reducing people to categories that institutions can process quickly. Experts begin to resemble priests, except their sacred words become precision, objectivity, efficiency, and standardized procedure. In that atmosphere, older moral language loses force because sin, evil, and character resist clean measurement. The more traditional institutions fade, the more bureaucracies promise intelligibility through technical systems that cannot truly provide wisdom. If this pattern feels familiar, subscribe to the channel because these arguments sharpen how we notice authority disguised as method. Medical technology provides clear evidence that tools reshape practice rather than merely extending it. Machines, tests, and procedures can save lives, yet they also redirect attention toward what instruments can register. A striking contrast emerges, as equivalent life expectancy coexists with far more American interventions. More bypass surgeries, hysterectomies, prostate surgeries, antibiotics, and X-rays reveal a culture trained to act through machinery. Once this technical style becomes normal, diagnoses multiply in ways that make further procedures appear self-justifying. Doctors are then used by technology as much as they use it, because systems reward intervention and equipment. Patients enter the system hoping for care, but often first encounter classifications, dosages, images, and standardized expectations. The problem arrived gradually, making the losses easier to miss, while technical success stories remained highly visible. What gets undone is not only restraint, but also a broader sense of illness, healing, and humane attention. Precision matters in medicine, but without skepticism, it can narrow care to whatever the machine already knows how to find. Computer technology intensifies transformation by spreading its uses and ideas rapidly across all domains. It doesn't merely speed up office work, but introduces a metaphor where reality is seen as data to process. People begin to appear as information processors, while nature and institutions are viewed as systems awaiting calculation and control. This metaphor becomes dangerous when simulation is mistaken for understanding and machine performance for human intelligence. Claims about artificial intelligence then subtly reduce mind, belief, feeling, and biological life. Meanwhile, institutions become more imposing when run by computers, even if their underlying assumptions remain shallow or mistaken. Automation can streamline procedures without addressing whether the organization itself deserves trust, loyalty, or continued existence. That is why computers often preserve unsatisfying arrangements, rather than prompting the kind of radical thought print once inspired. Instead of questioning power, people accept technical pronouncements and forget to ask who selected the data and why. The result is a culture where innovation itself feels like proof of progress, even when judgment has simply gone quiet. Some of the most powerful technologies are not gadgets, but methods that hide inside ordinary institutions, quietly redefining what counts as real. Statistics, polling, grading, intelligence testing, and social science categories redefine thought, beauty, boredom, sensitivity, or intelligence, giving judgment a scientific appearance. When a number is assigned to these qualities, judgment starts wearing a scientific costume. Francis Galton pushed this impulse to absurd extremes through beauty maps, skull measurements, and quantified boredom. The point is not merely that he was wrong, but that measurement itself gained almost sacred authority. Polling carries the same bias when leaders treat yes or no answers as public opinion, shaping belief while pretending only to record it. Questions then shape belief, and long reasoning disappears behind countable responses. Scientism thrives in this environment because it promises objectivity about human life without the burden of philosophical depth. Trivial findings begin to sound profound simply because they arrive with surveys, laboratories, and professional vocabulary attached. What vanishes is common sense about persons as living beings, whose meanings exceed any scale, score, or trend line. Technopoly does not merely alter tools and institutions, it also erodes the symbols that carry shared meaning. Advertising becomes a dominant force because it can seize any image or phrase and redirect it toward consumption. The harm runs deeper than mere manipulation, as serious and sacred symbols lose authority when everything becomes promotional, material. Once this occurs, tradition weakens because traditions live through symbols and the stories attached to them. Without respected narratives, questions about education, citizenship, and human purpose are answered only in technical language about means. Efficiency and interest may seem sufficient, but they cannot explain what learning, loyalty, or freedom are for. This narrowing of purpose leaves schools chasing devices while sidestepping the harder question of what kind of person matters. A culture with drained symbols still produces endless messages, but fewer stories strong enough to orient conduct. People become more informed about options and trends, while growing less certain about ends, obligations, and sacred limits. The hollow centre of Technopoly emerges when methods multiply everywhere, but shared reasons for using them keep disappearing. The central conflict is not between people and gadgets, but between culture and a thought world that demands surrender. Tools become dangerous when they cease to serve human purposes and start defining them for us. This shift is evident in efficiency, information overload, expert authority, medical interventions, computer metaphors, and quantified judgments. It also extends to symbols and stories, leaving societies richer in technique, but poorer in moral direction. Resistance does not require destroying machines, but regaining the distance needed to question their assumptions and limitations. Start by refusing to confuse information with understanding, precision with truth, or innovation with improvement. Education is crucial here because young people need histories, philosophies, religions, and arts that restore coherence to knowledge. A comprehensive curriculum can reconnect technology to questions of meaning, power, responsibility, and the shape of a good life. Only then can a society use its tools without becoming a tool of its tools. Stay with these questions and subscribe to the channel, because careful attention is one way to resist a world that demands obedience.